Next, great. So the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency is our partner in this webinar. They are made up of 26 member agencies that purchase water from the SFPUC, and collectively those agencies serve 1.8 million people. Their goal is similar to ours, to provide high quality water at a fair price. Next. Okay, so our program objectives are very important. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosque service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that our future water supply needs of our community are met. Additional ways to save. So depending on which agency is your water provider, each agency has different water conservation rebate programs. Here are two that are offered in partnership with Bosque, the Lawn Begon program and the Rain Barrel rebate program. More information can be found either on your agency's website or on the Bosque website. Two new programs that are also worth mentioning are the Smart Controller Rebate Program and the new revamped Landscape Program. Additional details can also be found at the bayareaconservation.org website. So if you're interested in more landscape classes like this one, this is an upcoming schedule. There are a variety of topics to choose from. There'll be more that are offered in the fall. Please visit the Bosque website to register. The next class will be taking place this coming Wednesday for the Summer Landscaping Essentials class. So a resource that I find very helpful is this website, the bayareagardening.org. It actually is very important for water-wise gardening in the Bay Area. There's a gallery of landscape photos for inspiration, as well as a watering guide that's very helpful. It can help determine how much water certain plants are needed, how much water is needed for certain plants based on where you live. So it's very helpful. You can also get to this link through the Bosque website as well.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And I would just like to call out for any Sunnyvale residents that are joining us today, some additional ways to save water in Sunnyvale. Through Santa Clara Valley Water District, Sunnyvale homeowners, commercial, industrial, and institutional property owners can receive a rebate for replacing lawns and plants that require a lot of water with drought-tolerant plants and permeable hardscape. And we also offer a rebate through Santa Clara Valley Water District for properties that connect closed washers to a gray water irrigation system. And you can learn more about those rebates at the link below. And also, if you're a Sunnyvale resident looking for compost, compost is available for residents at the Smart Station. Stop by Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with your own mask, shovel, and container. Great. Next slide. Great, and I would like to introduce our host today, our lecturer, Janice. Janice became a UC Master Gardener in 2010 and loves sharing her gardening enthusiasm and knowledge with the public. She is the owner and designer of Seascapes Garden Design in Half Moon Bay that specializes in colorful and sustainable water-wise gardens. And she's also the owner of Seascape Succulents Nursery in Half Moon Bay. Her gardens include many succulents, drought-tolerant plants, and California natives. We're super excited to hear from Janice today a ton about succulents. So with that, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lauren, for that introduction. And welcome everyone out there in Cyberland. Thanks for joining me today to learn more about growing succulents in your garden while also conserving water. My ultimate goal today is to share my knowledge and spread my enthusiasm of gardening to all of you, and I hope that comes through. First of all, I'd like to tell you who Master Gardeners are and how you might want to become one someday. We are a group of UC Master Gardeners. We're volunteers, trained and certified by the University of California to provide community service and educational outreach that helps home gardeners and community organizations garden sustainably and create a healthy environment. And if you also wish to learn more about gardening, then maybe you want to become one of us. And I'm not sure about how soon this is going to occur because of COVID-19, but we have a link on our website, and just keep checking it, and then perhaps you can join us eventually. We'd love to have you. Okay, so today, my learning goals for all of you. I first want to introduce you to succulents and define what they are, and give you some great choices for Bay Area gardens. Also, I'm going to discuss pre-planting considerations such as sun, climate, soil, drainage, and garden sizes. These factors will help you choose plants. For instance, not all plants thrive in full or hot sun, and not all plants will grow in part shade. So I hope to give you some guidance in that area so that you can choose the best plants for your location. I also will I do focus on landscape hardy plants that are easy to grow for the majority of people. And I don't promote the finicky plants. They're a little touchy to deal with, although there's one I might mention. Also, I'm going to discuss landscape design today, and that includes color and contrast and shapes and textures and differing heights and layers to get the most out of your landscape design. And lastly, I'm going to talk about care and maintenance, how you should water your garden, soil amendments versus fertilizer, discuss plant care in general, and how to abate some of the common pests that we have in the garden. And note that I won't be covering succulent propagation today as was advertised. We had a technical difficulty in streaming the video that I created, so I apologize for that. But it will be on YouTube, and there's a link provided in the last slide to tell you how to access it. You can also Google my YouTube channel using my name, Janice Moody, and succulents, and you'll find it that way as well. So, so we'll proceed with the talk. What I won't be covering today, before we get started, excuse me, is I won't be covering container gardening, houseplants, or succulent art projects, just because they're kind of a different animal and they require different care. And they're a little bit too time consuming for me. I don't have the level of patience for them. So I'm best dealing with plants in the ground. And I don't discuss too many cactus or cacti because I really don't like working around them. You know, they're a little spiny and difficult to deal with. So, and they do require more drainage and usually a little more sun and heat than on the coast here. So I won't be covering those areas, just so you know. Okay, first up, what is a succulent? Well, it's a drought-resistant plant that stores water in its leaves, stems, or roots. An example would be, for instance, cactus. Cactus stores its water in the stems, as you can see on this area, this picture here. Another plant that stores in its leaves would be aloes, for instance. And on the right here, we have a spiral aloe. Lots of juicy stems in that. Or I wouldn't call them stems, that's, I don't know what you would call that, floret. Also, they can store water in their leaves and stems and roots. And examples of those would be the aeoniums, for instance. And then the plants that can store them mostly in their roots would be an example like an elephant foot palm to your lower right here. So let's move on. Now, what's the advantages to growing succulents in the landscape? There's lots of pros and probably an equal amount of cons, but in general, they're pretty easy to grow. So first of all, they're very drought tolerant because they store water in their leaves or stems or roots. They can offer year-round color and interest just by the nature of them. They're very colorful. The foliage alone is very colorful. You don't even need flowers to make them colorful. And their shapes are so interesting. They offer a lot of interest, lend a lot of interest in the garden. They're relatively gopher and deer resistant. And I can't say for sure, yeah, there's no guarantees here, but I haven't lost a succulent yet to a gopher. And they bypass it and go straight for the poppies in my backyard. And although I've heard of people losing agaves to gophers, so I know it can happen. And they're relatively deer resistant for the most part. I have seen them nibble on some tender leaf aeoniums before, but in general, they don't prefer succulents. They're usually very easy to transplant because their roots are very shallow. They're normally about 6 inches deep in the soil, although there are some exceptions to that, which we'll discuss later. And so you can move them around quite a bit. So if something starts to get too big in one area, just pick it up and move it. And they're very easy to propagate, as you will learn in the YouTube video later on. Now, the cons include, most are sensitive to extreme cold or hail. They don't like too cold a temperature, although there are exceptions to that. Many are sensitive to extreme heat. In general, they like moderate temperature. So you have to remember that. If you're going to have an extreme cold spell or extreme heat spell, then you might need to take precautions. They are fragile. They do break easily. They are dangerous if they are spiky, like agaves, for instance, or cacti. So you do not want to plant any of those kind of plants around children or the public. And they can rot if left in the soil. If the soil gets too moist for too long a period of time, they're easily rot. So you need to take precautions in that regard. Here's an example of some hail damage on this calandrinia leaves down here. And now I would like to discuss some pre-planting considerations, what you need to know and do before you go out and buy a truckload of plants. Because if you bring home all these pretty plants from the nursery and you don't know where to put them, where they will thrive, then what's the sense? You know, you may be wasting a lot of money. And believe me, I've killed a lot of plants in my day, so I know. So through experience, you learn these things. So sun is critical to all plant growth, and too much or too little could pose problems for you. Climate is also critical. Warm temperatures are ideal, extremes are not. Soil is also a very important factor in plant growth and health. And this is something you can improve upon regardless of what type of soil you may have. It's one of those factors that you can actually alter, which is nice. You just want to make sure that that you just know your soil type to begin with, so you know how to amend it. And drainage is also very important, or you could easily overwet your succulents and have them rot on you. And then lastly, in these pre-planting considerations, I'm going to discuss garden size, because too large a garden will not be that agreeable with succulents. You need pathways, you need access to it, or you're going to be crushing them. They break pretty easily. Now I'd like to discuss sun, one of the critical elements to growth. I have people coming to me in my nursery all the time and ask me, well, what can I grow indoors? And I go, oh boy. So, well, do you have a sunny window? That will help considerably. But if you're working in a little office cubicle away from windows, chances are that succulent's not going to thrive there for very long at all. Now, in order to grow, photosynthesis has to take place, and you need sunshine for that. And here's a diagram right here of how you need sunlight, carbon dioxide from the air, and in the photosynthesis process, you get carbohydrates, which are the plant cell's growth, and also water is important in that whole equation. And then the plant grows and gives off oxygen. So it's a very neat process where the sun provides the energy and the plants takes it in and gives us oxygen in return. and takes in carbon dioxide, which we don't really need in our atmosphere that much of, right? That's greenhouse gases. That's not a good thing. So let's see. So I just want to discuss sun a little bit more in regard to your location where you're choosing to plant something. Keep in mind that during the winter hours or winter days, we have less sun, shorter days, and the sun is much lower in the sky. So the shadow on the north side of your house is going to get much deeper. So just keep that in mind when determining where you're going to plant things, because some things will grow in late winter. For instance, aeoniums will start growing in late winter, and if you don't have adequate sun for them to grow during their growing season, then you're not going to be successful in getting them to grow very well. Also, there's a minimum amount of sun that all plants need, and that's usually around 4 hours. 4 to 6 hours for most plants. That's the minimum. That's what's needed for photosynthesis and growth. And if you live in a hot climate, let's say south of Sunnyvale or around Sunnyvale, many of these plants will do better in morning sun alone and not in afternoon hot sun. Of course, if you learn your plants nature, then you can accommodate other, hot climate or sun tolerant plants in the west side of your house versus the east side. And keep in mind that any variegated or yellow leaves can't tolerate as much sun. So if you choose those very colorful plants, be careful about placing them in too much sun. And sun is good for improving color, as is any stress like cold and heat and sun. They all improve the color of a variety of plants. Now, without sun, I wanted you to be aware of what happens to these plants. Here on the left, we have an Echeveria elegans grown in full sun. On the right, we have the same plant grown in full shade underneath another plant. Notice the elongated stem regions. This plant is just conserving its energy to try to reach the sun, so it's stretching as far as it can. And so the tips of it have actually reached the sun here, but this under part, this elongated stem region was in the shade. So that's what will happen to plants if you take a plant and put it in your little office cubicle. That's what eventually will happen to that plant. Now, if you have a low light and you don't have a full sun area, then these are some of my favorite plants that I like to plant. The two agaves up here are Agave attenuatas, and they happen to be variegated ones, so they can handle less light. And the ones in the middle are aeoniums, and I'll be discussing the names of these later on. And this is a kiwi aeonium here, and over here we have a Portulacaria afra variegata. And this is a yellower version of, it's also called elephant food. South Africa, elephants eat it, I guess. And this is the yellower version, which does better in low light conditions versus complete sun. And these also brighten up a dark space. So I love using these plants. That's why I put them on this slide, basically. Now, what happens when you put these yellow leaf plants in the sun, you can oftentimes get sunburn. Now, the plant on the left, this kiwi aeonium, it would never burn in half-moon bay sun. Even if it was out in the sun all day long, it would never burn like that. But if you put that in Sacramento sun all day long, then that's what it could look like. And the one on the right happens to be it's an anomaly, a genetic anomaly. It's a sunburst aeonium that's yellower than usual, and it's burning in half-moon bay sun. So you might see these little dark leaves around the edges here, and these leaves die off, and eventually this whole floret will die off. They rarely reach maturity because there's not enough green chlorophyll in their cells to protect them from the sun. And that's how they grow, with the chlorophyll and through photosynthesis. Okay. Now let's say you have a full sun location. Well, these might be some good choices for you. I didn't mention golden barrel cactus here because it is a popular cactus, although I've never planted one. And this euphorbia sticks on fire in the middle. That's also a very popular one, but we don't have much luck growing it in Half Moon Bay. We need more heat and more drainage and sun for it than we have here. So just keep that in mind when choosing these plants. There's also an Opuntia macrocentra, which is a pretty cacti you might enjoy especially if you live Sunnyvale and southward. And these assorted agaves over here also love the sun, and they do well in Half Moon Bay or in San Jose. They'll do equally well. They can tolerate a lot of sun, and they don't require a lot of nutrients in the soil either, so they're kind of easy to grow for the most part. And then here we have again this Portulacaria afra, but this is a green-leafed variety, so it can tolerate much more sun than the variegated one that I showed in the previous slide. Now, another factor for growth, of course, is climate and temperature. And as I said before, succulents prefer moderate temperatures. 60 to 80 degrees is ideal. So if you have this kind of temperature year-round with preferably cooler nights, you're going to be able to grow just about any succulent, just about all of them, perhaps. This is what happens with severe cold. You're going to get frost damage. And here's an agave that's just wilted from frost damage. Here's that hail damage that I showed you before in a larger picture. So that's what it can look like the day after you have a hail storm. And we've had hail here in Half Moon Bay for the past couple of years, reliably, unfortunately. And it's not always been the case, because I grew up here and we didn't always have hail in the wintertime, but now we do. So very few of these will grow in the desert or freezing conditions. Very few succulents will grow in desert or freezing conditions, but there are exceptions to that. And for instance, in the desert, you can grow agaves and cacti, and there are some cacti that can survive under snow even. So it really pays to research your plant, especially if you're spending a good amount of money on a plant. It pays to do some research on it. Okay, next up. Well, now let's say you're expecting some frost or hail. How can you protect those succulents? Well, what I do is I take some lightweight row cover material like Agravon, and I go out and I cover up those succulents overnight to protect them. Otherwise, I end up with that, right? This is one way to get around the cold weather. Now, characteristics, if you live in a colder area, let's say Montana, or I don't know, in inland valleys, maybe where you get more freezing temperatures than we get here, you want to focus maybe more on cold hardy succulents, and they'd have a characteristic of having deeper root systems, such as aloes and sempervivums, like these down here. Agaves also can tolerate more cold than others, and aloes as well. I don't have an aloe shown here, but they can handle some colder temperatures as well because of their deep root systems. Or if they have less juicy leaves, such as, agaves again, or Opuntia, or sempervivums, and yuccas as well, Gelosperma, and some creeping sedums like this lemon ball sedum rupestre. So those tend to tolerate a little bit more cold than most succulents. And keep in mind that cold temperatures actually improve the color of many of them. If you take an Echeveria afterglow, for instance, which is a beautiful pink Echeveria, and it goes through a winter, it will actually turn pinker when the winter is done with. So let's keep those things in mind. Now, not all sun-tolerant plants are heat-tolerant, so I just wanted to mention this briefly. Cacti, of the heat-tolerant succulents, cacti are the most sun-tolerant, then agaves, and then aloes. So if you live in a hot climate and you want to grow an aloe, they will survive there, but you might want to give them a little more shade, afternoon shade, than you would the others. And then again, remember that those variegated yellow leaves are less sun tolerant, so give them more shade as well. Here are, I think I showed you this slide already, but I just thought it bared repeating. So these are both heat and sun loving succulents that can handle both heat and sun.
And Janice, if I could interrupt you just for a moment.
Yes.
We did have a question about what you would consider extreme cold or extreme heat. If you have
Okay, so if the temperature is over 80 degrees for a prolonged period of time, that's what I would call extreme heat for succulents. Or if the temperature was below 32 degrees for a prolonged period of time, that's what I would call extreme cold, I guess, in the Bay Area. Yeah, in the Bay Area in general. Although there's a good many succulents that can handle 25-degree nights and some even 10-degree nights, but not on a prolonged basis. You know, you don't want those cold temperatures each and every night for a long period of time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Heat and cold tolerant agaves. As I mentioned before, they can handle both heat and cold. So here are some good choices for you, and I've named them. I was hoping that you could get a copy of these slides. This may not be possible, but we can probably make it available through the Master Gardener website. So just keep checking our website for our slides, and perhaps we'll be able to post these for you. But the agave blue flame is a favorite of mine. It stays relatively small, comparatively speaking. It doesn't get like 6 feet by 6 feet. It gets like 3 by 3. This agave stricta stays a little smaller than that. This agave blue glow gets about 3 feet by 4 feet. And this agave Victoria Reginae, or Queen Victoria, it's about 2 foot by 2 foot. And this agave Univitada quadricolor, it stays relatively small, less than 2 feet, as well as this agave Parii retro choke. Now we're going to move on to soil. Soil, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the things that you can alter to some extent. So it's not like the sun and the climate, and which basically you can't control. So this is one of those things that you can help with. And the darker brown or the black soil is usually an indication of carbon or humus content, and thus soil health. The more, the better to grow the healthier plants. So the more carbon content, the more soil life there will be, which aids in releasing nutrients to the plants in a sustainable manner. So you want soil life in that soil, and you don't want it to be devoid of life. And when you take a scoopful of soil and you see worms in that soil, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Don't say, ooh, icky. No, when you see a worm, that's a good sign of soil health. Just briefly, I wanted to talk about the carbon cycle. And here's a simplified version of it. Basically, plants can take in carbon from the air and sequester it into the soil through photosynthesis. And then plant roots release carbon into the soil as well. And then dead materials such as dead decaying animals, compost, leaf litter, or mulches can also help retain some carbon. And then some carbon is released into the atmosphere through decomposition. So it's a continual cycle, but we want to do our best to keep carbon in the soil and out of the atmosphere if we can. And nature just has this wonderful plan out there on how to do that, and we humans keep messing it up. So we want to keep the soil covered with plants, or with plant debris, or dead plants, or dead animals for that matter. We want to try to keep carbon contained in the soil as much as possible. Now, if you haven't heard of the Soil Food Web, then please do Google it and learn more about it. It's very intriguing. I'm not an expert on it. That we have master composters out there who are experts on this and can tell you a lot more about it. But basically, the soil life, the microbes in the soil and all the insects with it are critical to life on Earth. And we want to keep our microbes happy. And there are far more beneficial microbes in the world than there are pathogenic ones. So they're not all bad like COVID-19. Most of them are good for us. And we have 3 to 4 pounds of microbes in our guts. And without them, we would die. They are beneficial to our health. So we want to be kind to our microbes. I will keep stressing that, be kind to your microbes. And in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, there can be more than the people on Earth. So 1 teaspoon can contain more microbes than there are people on Earth. And just, you know, these little microbes, what they do is they feed on this organic matter, the debris or the plant roots for themselves. And so they're taking in all this carbon that's given to them, and they're releasing nutrients to the plants in a sustainable manner when the plant calls for it. So it's not you know, dumping on synthetic fertilizer and giving a plant nutrients when it's not its growing season or when it doesn't need these nutrients. It's actually releasing the nutrients to the plant when the plant calls for it. And there's this symbiotic relationship between the plant and all of these little critters in the soil, and they're all helping each other maintain a healthy environment. So we don't want to mess that up. Just briefly, ideal soil, I'm sure not all of you have ideal soil, but this is what it looks like. It will be 45% mineral, that's the clay, the silt, and the sand in dirt. So if you go out and get a shovel full of dirt, it's going to be really heavy with those minerals in it, right? Minerals are heavy versus like potting mix, which is all organic matter and decomposes over time. It's made of wood product and peat moss and quark coconut fiber and these sorts of things that just decompose. Whereas soil, dirt, I should say, the minerals in the soil don't decompose, they stay there and they lend a quality to the soil. Ideally, you want 20% clay and 40% silt and 40% sand, because if you have too much clay, then you get too much water retention and the plants could rot if they stay wet too long. If you have too much sand, then too much water can shed off and along with the nutrients, and that's not good for the plant life either. So ideally, if you have this kind of composition in your soil, you'd be, you know, perfect for plant growth. And along with that, soil contains organic matter, as I alluded to before, all the plant debris that falls on top and all the roots that are in the soil. All of this is organic matter that the soil life feeds on. So we want to make sure we have at least 5% of that, and you could have more, just as in potting mix, it's just 100% organic matter. So, you know, plants will grow in 100% organic matter as well. And this organic matter is often referred to as humus when it's in this sequestered state in the soil. And it improves soil structure and also feeds the soil life. So the more the better. So if you have, you know, clay will also hold water and nutrients, but organic matter can do the same. So they're kind of interchangeable in that sense, but we don't want too much clay. Also, a component of soil is airspace. So 50% of your soil should be air, and that is interchangeable with air and water. So when soil dries out, okay, it becomes 50% air, and when you water the soil, then it becomes 50% water. So that flows back and forth and it's interchangeable. Now, I think that covered that. Going. Soil amendments. Now, our master gardener mantra is feed your soil, not your plants. And so try to remember that, everybody. I hope you go home with that mantra, if nothing else. Adding organic matter to any soil will improve its structure, moisture retention, and porosity by feeding the soil life. And so adding such things as compost or mulch to your soil will improve any kind of soil, whether it be sandy or clay. If it's sandy, it will add a stickiness, a glue type feel to it that will hold on to more moisture for you and with nutrients. And if it has too much clay, it will make the soil more porous, because those little critters move into the soil and create little tunnel systems and everything and aggregates and make the soil much healthier. So these soil amendments that I use in my gardens happens to be aged horse manure with shavings, which is readily available here in Half Moon Bay at the local soil farm. And I find it ideal for succulents. although you can use, good quality compost as well. You can use manure from any herbivore, basically. I don't think I would use chicken manure because I think I have read that it's a little higher in nitrogen, but that's maybe better for vegetable growing. But you could probably use it in a minimal amount and be fine. You can also use fish emulsion by applying that once a month. That would help feed the soil as well. And I tend to keep a little wood shavings or mini bark on top as a layer to keep the moisture in, but not too thick a layer, because we don't want to keep too much moisture in when we're dealing with succulents. So maybe about an inch of that, kept away from the base of plump leaves so that it doesn't rot the plump leaves out. Right, so this is an example of some soil I dug up in my parking lot in my backyard when I got here. The soil on the right was underneath 6 inches of gravel, and see how compact and dense it is? Well, the same soil over here on the left was underneath mulch for several years, and notice the difference in porosity in the aggregates. So that's what you can improve just any soil type. And people complain about our downtown soil here all the time to me, saying, oh, it's so hard. I am clay and crusty and everything. I say, well, I call it black crust, but it's great black crust because it is so full of carbon. You can tell from the color of it, especially this soil right here, which has been mulched. It's darker in color. And it grows everything. I mean, we have great soil in downtown Half Moon Bay, and so no one really should complain about it. Now, here you may encounter this kind of soil, and if you do, it's a tough battle, but you can overcome it. This is considered very heavy clay, and it's moldable, like yellow clay that you can mold with your hands. This will need some amending, some deep digging to get it in shape for succulents. I would recommend you you till in about 3 to 4 inches of this mixture to the first 6 inches of soil. So you want to add in maybe 1/3 redwood fines or wood shavings, 1/3 quality compost or manure, and 1/3 pumice, coarse sand, or very small lava rock for aeration purposes. And then try to let that rest for a while so the soil life gets growing in there and helps to open up the soil a little bit more before you put your plants in. But that's the way to improve heavy clay soil. There are other ways as well, and drainage does help, and that's what I'm going to be discussing next. So ensure proper drainage, which is critical to succulent success. Raise the level of it. As for instance, here, this garden right here on Howard Avenue in Burlingame has a natural little retaining, they're built, not a natural retaining wall, but a retaining wall along the street, and it's perfect for drainage purposes. They also happen to have perfect soil there, so that's why these plants are thriving. And then Burlingame is a little bit warmer weather than we have in Half Moon Bay, and so I've never seen plants of succulents get this large. It's like the ideal growing conditions right there. Also, you can create mounds for drainage. Here, I've put in about 4 or 5 different rocks that you can't see at this point in time, but that helps as a retaining wall. Also serves as stepping stones to get to access to areas without crushing the plants. So this is a mound here. And over here, we had an issue with the downspout draining right over here where I planted all of these succulents along the edge. So in order to avoid that drainage issue, we took a little culvert pipe here and we diverted the water from the downspout onto the driveway. So be sure you don't plant anything right underneath a downspout or a sump pump outlet as well. Those 2 things you want to avoid or divert the water. And as I alluded to before, garden size is important because you don't want to be stepping on these succulents. They're very tender. You have to be able to reach all the plants easily. And here, this is about 5 feet deep, which is too deep to reach from the front, but I have a little pathway in the back to get to these back plants. So that helps me maintain this space right here in front of my place. And then this one is a raised bed in a garden across the street from me. And this one I can reach from both sides. And also note, if you're planting near a street of sidewalk and you want to avoid dogs jumping in and damaging your succulents, then you might want to put up a little 18-inch fence. You can barely see it here, but there is a little wire fence that I put up, and that usually keeps the animals from jumping over and damaging anything. They're still going to pee on it, but that's all right. They can survive that. Other ways to control the garden size is to add pathways. And on the left, this is a neighbor's of mine. I did not design this garden. I wish I could take credit for it. It's really beautiful. But they put in all these pathways so that they can maintain this garden easily. And it's on Poplar Avenue in Half Moon Bay, so you could take a peek at it sometime. It's gorgeous. And then this garden here, this woman had a disability, and so wanted to access all of her plants easily. So she had this pathway, this stairs and pathway put in so that she could more easily, readily access all of the plants on either side. And then this cute little garden here has little footprint stepping stones in it. So I thought that was a cute idea. Not mine, the homeowner's idea, but I thought it was darling. So at this point, I'm going to pause for any questions.
Great. We do have a couple questions, and they have to do with soil. Where do you recommend to have soil tested?
Normally, testing is not critical. You know, usually you can feel the soil, and if it clumps and stays clumped when it's damp, then that's an indication of maybe too much clay. But if it breaks up, you know, easily in your hand after it clumps, then usually the soil texture is good enough. You can do a jar method where you put a bunch of soil in a jar, and I think this Dawn detergent, you put so many drops of Dawn detergent in there and shake it up, and then just let it sit there for like a day, and then you can actually visualize the different layers. I think the heavier the clay would be on the ground, on the lower level, the silt is in the middle, vice versa, sand on the bottom, silt, and then clay. And then the humus or the organic matter will kind of be floating on top. So there, you can Google that and figure out how to see how much clay content you have in your soil or how much sand you have that way. Other than that, unless you have a location that was once a chemical hazardous waste site or something, or or gas station, previous gas station, normally soil testing is not that necessary.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. How long should the soil rest after you amend it with horse manure?
Well, as long as the horse manure is aged, and I should have emphasized that, it needs to be completely composted, so there's no pathogenic bacteria in it. As long as it's well aged, you can plant right away, and it doesn't matter.
Okay, and while we're on the subject of soil, is there testing needed to learn more about soil pH when you're planting succulents?
Well, no, pH I don't think it's a critical factor because it can be buffered by the use of organic matter. So compost will actually help buffer the soil and make it more neutral. So either if it's too acid or too basic, then compost has that ability to buffer it. And so I've never tested soil for pH, although I know there are little probes you can get to test the soil pH, and it might be useful for some plants that really need acid soil or something. But for the most part, I think your typical soils around here will be fine.
Okay, and another soil question. You showed ideal soil components. Are you saying that the ideal soil you showed will be good for all succulents and just use the height for drainage, not soil components?
You can add amendment to the soil to improve drainage, like the sand and gravel and pumice and that sort of thing. But now, okay, so repeat the first part of the question. Sorry.
No problem. So it's in regards to the soil components.
Yeah.
They wanted to know if you're saying that the ideal soil that you showed in the photos would be good for all succulents, and just use the height for drainage, not as a component itself, I guess.
You can combine the two. You can, I mean, extra drainage never really hurts unless you have extremely sandy soil, and then you don't really want to raise the elevation of it that much, or you don't need to raise the elevation of it that much. But as I said, you know, adding compost or manures to the soil will add a stickiness to it, so that will help counteract the excess drainage of too much sand or gravel. But if you happen to have perfect soil, like that one garden on Howard Avenue in Burlingame, then you could do anything with it. It doesn't really matter. It'll be great either way for any kind of plants.
Okay, and looks like one more about soil. Will succulents lying on soil harm the leaves, or should there be a gravel or mulch barrier around the plant?
Will what harm the leaves?
Oh, when a succulent is lying on soil.
Well, if you have some plump leaves, let's say an echeveria that has a lot of plump leaves, usually I don't put compost or mulch touching the bottom leaves. That I keep it away from the bottom leaves, just because that mulch or that compost may retain too much moisture for too long a period of time and help rot the bottom leaves. But in most cases, if you only have like an inch of it, it's fine. And laying it on top, I mean, you would be planting it. And in my propagation video, I can discuss how to deal with propagating leaves and placing them on soil, if that was part of the question. I'm not quite clear.
I think it's just referring to maybe the crown of a succulent, maybe if it's, you know, what would be considered too close to the soil.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Well, if you were planting during the winter months when the rain is happening, I usually raise up the level of the plants about an inch out of the soil, just to avoid any potential rotting problems, because it stays wet longer. Of course, when you have no control of the water, then you have to worry about rotting in excessive rainy winters. So yeah, I would, if you have, and the plumper the leaf, the more you want to keep it away from the base of the soil, I guess you could say.
Okay, great.
All right, anything else? Okay, let me move on to landscape design then. Okay, so here's that neighbor of mine on Poplar Avenue that has this beautiful succulent garden. I'm going to be discussing lots of design basics, and this garden incorporates a lot of them, and I'll be referring to it again. In the design basics, I'm going to go over color and the use of color and contrast to lend interest in your garden, and the use of shapes and textures, and heights and layers. Notice this garden on Howard Avenue has the taller plants in the back and the shorter plants in the front, and cascading ones on the edges. So those are all the components of design that I'm going to be discussing herein. Now, this is a very stunning garden, and it's not mine again. I have to give credit to Cynthia Nations, another master gardener. This is her wonderful garden in full bloom, and it's just amazing, isn't it? Yeah. But even if it's not in full bloom, this garden is just wonderful in appearance because of all the foliage color. That's what I love about succulents. Even without the blooms, you've got great foliage color. Whoops, let me go back. Okay, so I like to use this color wheel when I design different vignettes in gardens. And on the left are the warm colors, you know, the earth tone colors here. And on the right are the cool colors, or the ocean colors. And sometimes you might want to create a little area in the garden composed of one or the other. And just, it lends variety to your garden and some interest. So note that the yellow is a component of both. So I tend to use yellows in both combinations when I design these areas in the gardens, which I will describe further. Now here's complementary colors, and on a color wheel they are opposite each other on the color wheel, and when you combine these complementary colors your garden will pop. Let's, for instance, if you got orange and blue, those are opposite each other on the color wheel. Red and green, here we have red and green, and they complement one another. And then we've got purple and yellow here, so, and as well as here. So just keep that in mind when you're placing your plants and designing your garden. You can also choose similar hues or the cool colors. On the left-hand side, you've got the cool colors combined with a pink, more of a warm color, but they're all the similar hues, so they're more pastel in shade, and they really look good together. And the plants that are shown here are the Echeveria Afterglow, Oscularia deltoides, and Echeveria elegans. Over here, we have the cool color combination of an Agave Americana, surrounded by Oscularia deltoides, and Echeveria elegans, these smaller ones here, and then this Echeveria Conte in the middle. Here's a warm color combination that I have in my demonstration garden right now in the backyard. So feel free to stop by when you're in Half Moon Bay. I have a nursery in my backyard. It's now an official nursery. Before it was kind of a pseudo nursery just for my jobs, but now I'm opening it to the public more readily now. So here we've got Agave attenuata, ray of light in the center, and these aeonium, giant velvet roses here. Really big. You need a big space for these aeoniums. And the aeonium sunburst, the yellow one up here. And I think I've got some graptopetalums that are hiding out over here. And then this is a Phormium evening glow that kind of got out of control, and I had to take it out. It grew much larger than it was supposed to grow. Sometimes that happens when you give things optimal growing conditions. Here's an example of using contrasting brightness. I love doing this too, because having a bright plant against a dark background really makes that bright plant pop in the garden. So on the left we have a Phormium black adder and a kiwi aeonium here, and underneath it Crassula capitella campfire. And over here we have a group of aeoniums. On the top is the aeonium Schwarzkopf, and the aeonium sunburst, and the aeonium Mardi Gras. Now, besides color, you also want to lend some variety to the shapes and textures to lend some interest to your garden. And on the left-hand side, you can see the different shapes here involved. The round shape and the deltoid shape of this Oscularia deltoides. That lends interest to the vignette, as well as the spiky plant, the Agave Americana and the Phormiums. This is a Phormium after evening glow, excuse me. And so it's nice to add some different textures to your gardens, as well as height, which I'll discuss next. And then here, this is a garden, Ruth Brankhoft garden over in the East Bay. And look at the use of textures and heights here. That's really nice. Now, in terms of companion plants, I do use a handful, because not all succulents are tall. And if they are tall, then they sometimes tend to look too similar to the other plants surrounding it. So for variety's sake, I usually incorporate some Phormiums, which are New Zealand flaxes. As I mentioned before, this is an evening glow here. A smaller version of this would be a jester. If you don't want something getting quite this large, this got to be like 5 by 5, and it overwhelmed my garden, so I took it out and put some smaller ones in. Here's another nice one for contrast purposes, and that's the Phormium black adder. That gets to be about 4 feet by 4 feet. And then these leucadendrons in the middle, Safari Sunset and Safari Gold Strike, make nice backdrops, and they're very colorful and also drought tolerant. And then over here we have this mound with a Beschorneria yacoides, flamingo glow. And over here we have a cordyline electric pink in this pot. Now I tend to use phormiums more often than cordylines. They're just a little bit easier to grow. I've killed too many cordylines, so I don't use them that much. Now here's where I'm going to talk about the concept of a design concept of thrillers, fillers, and spillers. And this is usually relating to container gardening, but I've kind of extrapolated from that and apply it to regular garden settings as well in the landscape. And in this garden on Howard Avenue in Burlingame, we've got leucadendrons in the back for your thrillers, and as well as this Agave Americana here, which is going to get about 6 feet by 6 feet eventually. So that will be what we call a thriller eventually, and a focal point. And what I refer to as fillers would be these other plants that are kind of medium height, like the aeoniums right here. And these aeoniums, although these aeoniums have grown taller than I've ever seen them grow in a garden. It must be just perfect conditions. And then, so the fillers are medium height plants, and then the spillers are the low-lying ones, the more like the ground covers. And the only one that's really going to spill much here are going to be these Oscularia deltoides. They will cascade over. There's not that many succulents that I have found that are really good spillers, that stay looking good, year round. Here's some other examples of what you might call thrillers. You can use artwork for that matter. So this cactus, a wire cactus in the background, can act as a thriller, but eventually this aloe right here is going to grow to 6 feet tall, and you won't see that artwork any longer. And then that torch aloe right there will become the focal point and the thriller. And over here we've got an aloe tree, or is that yucca? That could be a yucca. And that's going to get very large eventually. And here we have another thriller, that Agave Americana. And yeah, so in this garden, we have the thriller in the center of a circular area in the garden. So there's a pathway all the way around this area, and the focal point would be this pot it's actually a fountain that they've converted into a garden container, and that tends to be your thriller in this instance. And if you have to consider your vantage point when you're designing these things. You want to make sure that if you're looking at it from a distance, from here, from the back, and there, excuse me for faltering here. Just consider your vantage point when you layer these, okay? So if it's up against a wall and you've got a 5-foot garden bed, then put your thrillers in the background, and then your fillers in front of that, and then your spillers or your ground cover in front of that, so you can visually see everything. If you're looking at it from a circular vantage point, then you put your thrillers in the middle and your fillers around it in a circular fashion, and then your ground covers around that, so you can see everything from every vantage point. And as I already mentioned, these make great fillers, these aeoniums on the left. And this is another aeonium here. And also these echeverias also make great fillers. This is an afterglow right here. And by the way, rocks can be fillers. And they don't need water. So there you go, conserve water at the same time. And they serve as stepping stones. As I already mentioned from the first slide, we've got some more ground covers or spillers, and I've listed them here for you. The Echeveria elegans, the Sedum rupestre Angelina is mixed in here. Crassula campfire. Over here we have Crassula red pagoda, Sedum jellybean. This is a Calancholy pumila, and Sedum lemon ball. And then here's what I call poppers. Anything that's not green in your garden. I call poppers, just because it draws your eye to it. So such as anything like pinks and reds and yellows, be sure to try to incorporate some of those different colors in your garden so there's not a monotonous green background. And here are some that I routinely use. As I said, the sunburst aeonium over here on the lower right, the afterglow, and the campfire, and the red pagoda, and the lemon ball. I use those quite a bit. Now, if you have a big space and you want some large plants to take up that space, here are some good choices. Calandrinia, right here. It's a little spread to about 5 by 5. Your torch aloe, as I mentioned before, will get very tall. Each year it'll get a little taller, up to maybe 6 feet. And then got Aeonium cyclops in the back here. That gets very tall, about 4 feet. This is just your typical jade plant that gets about 4 by 4, maybe even bigger over time. And we've got bulbine fructescens here. And this is these Agave americana, and this variety happens to be a Mediopicta alba. It has a white center to it. I think it's quite pretty. And this is that elephant food portulacaria that I mentioned before, and a cotyledon orbiculata as well. So these will grow and grow and grow if you want something to fill up a big space. Here's my demonstration garden behind my building on Main Street. So if you're in Half Moon Bay, stop by, take a look if you want to see what they're going to look like in the garden, because sometimes it can be deceiving looking at a pot, not knowing what it's going to grow to in size in relationship to other plants. So that's why I have this little garden in behind my place, and stop by anytime. I happen to live there, so I'm around a lot. I'm just going to go into a little more detail about the most common plants I use, or my favorites. And here's a picture of them, but I'll go into more detail on the following slides. This one, as I mentioned to you before, takes up a lot of space, Calandrinia spectabilis, or rock purslane. It blooms almost all year long here in Half Moon Bay. It's remarkable. In hotter climates, it may not be the case, or colder, but I know here on the coast, it does wonderfully. The only thing that I like to do to make it look good year round, or almost year round, is in the late winter, I like to cut it back to about 1 foot by 1 foot, or 1 foot by 2 feet. And it'll look kind of ugly for a month or so, but it's well worth it because it can get too stemmy and leggy eventually as it gets older. So just cut it back in late winter and live with the ugliness for a little while. And then in the summer months, cut back the flowers if they tend to look a little too dry, and they'll come right back again. So it's a wonderful plant. Here's a plant that is a favorite of mine. It's not the easiest thing to grow, so I'm not going to tell you that, I'll lie to you. I do have some for sale, but I will always be honest with you and tell you they're not the easiest thing to grow, and they're very rare and expensive. I happen to have one in my garden. I have several on site, but they're called an aloe polyphylla, or spiral aloe. They grow to be about 3 by 3 eventually. It takes about 5 or 6 years for them to get there. They don't start out spiraling, but after they get to be about 12 inches wide, they start to spiral, and they're just amazing plants. They're really beautiful. Here's some of my agave favorites that are good size for most gardens. They don't overwhelm a garden space. They're moderate in size. This is an agave blue glow with these red edges to it. The agave quadricolor here it stays smaller, about 2 by 2. This agave blue glow gets to be about 3 by 4. And this agave blue flame gets to be about the same size, about 3 feet, 4 feet wide. There's also agave attenuatas, which I don't use routinely because they're just a little bit harder to grow and keep looking good. They're a little bit more fragile than these agaves. They are beautiful if you treat them with TLC. They do look great in the garden though. And then there's this Queen Victoria, agave Queen Victoria, which is really a beautiful plant. And it gets to be about 2 feet by 2 feet eventually. It's a very slow grower though, so you have to just be patient with that plant. Here's my Echeveria favorites I usually routinely use in most gardens. And this is an afterglow over here. This is the Lady Aquarius, and this is the Elegans, which is also a great ground cover. It's like a little hen and chicks that keep spreading and spreading. Here are some of my Aeonium favorites. As I meant, I think I named these for you before, and then they're listed here as well. So when you review this recording, you'll get these names again. I won't spend time repeating names over and over again. And I've already mentioned a lot of these as well, so I won't spend time there. But this one, maybe I haven't mentioned this, Calancholy pumila. It's a really pretty, dusty kind of gray color with these pink flowers. Right now it's blooming this time of year. And it's pretty hardy, holds up well in the garden. So yeah, so those are some great low-lying plants for your garden. And for those of you interested in pollinators, here's a list of pollinators and what they attract: the bees, the butterflies, the hummingbirds, the moths. I'm not going to read all of that for you, but just these are the ones that I tend to use more often: the Calendarnia spectabilis, the aloe, torch aloe here, the Aeonium cyclops, which has a beautiful bloom, and the sedum autumn joy. So I think that's in this section. Any questions?
Great. Yeah, we have a couple. Someone asked, where's the best place to research and get ideas for succulent design?
Well, of course, there's my website. You can go there. My Facebook page actually is more up to date than my website, and I don't plant just succulents, so you will see a lot of drought-tolerant perennials in my gardens, probably more so than succulents. But Deborah Lee Baldwin, she writes a lot of books on succulents and designing with succulents. She's a great resource. She also has a website. That's Deborah Lee Baldwin. Succulent Gardens might also have some information on their website. Those are the ones that I think of off the top of my head.
Great, thank you so much. Another question, someone asked, how do you keep them so nice and not messy? I see a lot of succulents out of control.
Well, that comes up next in the next section, which is called care and maintenance. So let me go into that next. And are there any other questions?
Just one. Someone asked, what makes the spiral aloe so hard to grow?
Well, they grow in elevated regions in South Africa, and they experience well, they can actually live under snow apparently, but they don't like exceptional heat for prolonged periods of time. Drainage has to be very good for them to be successful. Knock on wood, the first place I put it, it didn't thrive. I moved it to a higher spot in my garden, and I actually, when I saw that it was getting too much water in the wintertime, I actually dug it out and put it in a pot so it wouldn't stay over wet for too long. So you kind of have to baby them a little bit, but they're worth it, I think. I think they're beautiful. Okay.
Great. Yeah, I think we can continue and answer some after that on maintenance.
Okay, great. So in this section, I'm going to talk about watering and how not to overwater, because that's probably the #1 thing that you can do to kill a succulent is overwater it. I'm also going to discuss soil amendments again, because that's so important to health of the plant. And then regular plant maintenance or care, cleaning up the plants a couple of times a year. And then I'll address pest abatement for the most common pests. First of all, watering. Very important to remember to let the soil dry out between waterings. So that means either you stick your finger in there and make sure it's completely dry before you water again, or you take a moisture meter such as this and push that into the soil in several locations to make sure. One location may not be truly indicative of the soil moisture level. So I usually poke it in a few different spots. Just make sure it's just like completely dry or almost dry. before you water again. And don't hesitate to give it a lot of water. I mean, you can water it till it's 6 inches deep in depth, because that's usually where their roots lie. Most of them lie in about the first 6 inches. And so don't be afraid to water it, but then you have to remember to let it dry out between waterings. That's key to their success. And water the entire zone. Don't just water the one little side of the plant with a drip irrigation spaghetti tube. I'm not a real big fan of spaghetti tubes because they just break all the time, and they're only located, you know, one side of the plant, and then some people have their timers set for like 5 minutes every other day or every once a week, and so it gets a little dribble of water on one side of it. And you want to feed the soil life primarily. You're looking at feeding not just the roots, but the soil life surrounding the roots. So, you know, the microbes need air and water as well to thrive. So you have to feed those microbes as well as giving them the carbon they need from the debris in the roots that you're leaving on the soil. So yeah, anyway, just make sure you water the entire zone. And this method right here, this is a netafib system that does a good job of watering the zone. And you space it accordingly, you plant your area first, and then you put these tubings between, and then monitor how much water you need. I can't tell you for sure how much you need. You might need an hour, once a week. In Half Moon Bay, I only water once or twice a month. In warmer climates, you might need to water once, 2 to 4 times a month. It depends on the weather. If we've had a lot of fog in June, or if you get June gloom here in Half Moon Bay, then I may not have to water the entire month. So just use your finger or that moisture meter and determine the soil moisture. And usually mornings are best, so that they dry out during the day and they don't stay damp overnight. If you choose to hand water, then choose something like this Dram 400 sprinkler head here. I like to use that because it's gentle flow. It doesn't wash away all the mulch when I water, and it also will wash away aphids if I find any aphids. It'll also do a good job on that. And then just keep in mind that less water will stress the plant and improve some of the plant's color, make them more vibrant, maybe redder. Okay, so fertilizing, or I put fertilizing here, but we master gardeners don't use that term very often because that oftentimes refers to synthetic fertilizers. And we don't use a lot of synthetic fertilizers in our education. The education we received was not promoted, although it was mentioned. And you may need it for container gardening because it's harder to control the nutrient level in containers than it is in soil. If you feed the soil life what it needs, all those nutrients in the soil become available to the plant. Whereas with a container, it might dry out, the soil microbe population might deplete, and then you lose, and there's only a limited number of nutrients in a container, and it's confined. So that's where you might end up using some synthetic fertilizer, but for the most part, you don't really need to. So organic methods of amending soil are sustainable methods, as I mentioned before, and synthetic is not sustainable. They're made with combustion engines, so it uses a lot of energy in the process of pulling nitrogen out of the air and making chemical nitrogen fertilizer is a very high energy usage. So if you do use a synthetic, then no more than a 5-to-2 ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is recommended. And keep in mind that organic fertilizers and compost, they're going to contain more than just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They won't really have high levels of that, but they may also very well contain trace minerals and micronutrients, which are essential for plant health. So, what equals growth does not always equal health. The same goes for children. You can give a child growth hormone and they can grow massively, but will they be healthy? No. Or if you feed a child fast food all their lives, will they grow? There may be too much growth there, but will they be healthy? No. So what what promotes growth does not necessarily promote health, and so you just need to keep that in mind and give the soil life what it needs so that that soil life can provide the proper nutrients to your plant when the plant needs it. And I usually apply, you know, like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of the aged horse manure twice a year, early in the fall before the rains begin, and then again in the spring before the burst of growth happens. Or you can use fish. Some people can use fish emulsion, and that might be very useful for containers, for instance, because it's in a liquid form. Or compost tea, that's a favorite of our master gardeners. It hasn't been, it's an anecdotal fertilizer, as you might say. It hasn't been fully studied, but it does produce pretty good results. So compost tea is something you'd have to research and make, but it can be made by a homeowner. And in terms of keeping them looking nice, well, you know, after they get their burst of growth, like aeoniums start growing in late winter, well, after that, this time of year, they start losing their leaves underneath. So you just need to, you know, defoliate those dead leaves to make it look prettier. And that's a natural process when you see those leaves underneath the aeoniums, as well as agaves. You know, this is what an agave will do. The lower leaves tend to die eventually, and so you just need to take some very sharp instruments and remove those if you don't like the looks of them. You can also just deadhead flowers any point in time, and that will actually help rejuvenate the growth of the plant, because it won't be sending energy to the flower any longer, and it'll add, you know, maybe some bushiness to the plant if you divert the energy from the flower to the plant. You can also transplant easily, as I said before, to make things look better. You can divide. They're easily dividable a lot of times. And don't be afraid to throw pieces out. Or what I do is I put them on the street and advertise them on Nextdoor, and then people just love coming by and getting my cuttings, or sometimes even free plants. So just share with the neighborhood, and you make a lot of friends that way. Stop, snails and slugs. Okay, so it's my worst enemy out here. I've been known to go out with my headlamp on in the middle of the night and pluck those little critters off those plants. One night I went out and I found about a dozen snails on this plant. Can you believe that? Oh my gosh. So so I do oftentimes, well, I'll do that if I see evidence of damage, like this plant leaf right here has been eaten quite a bit. So if you see little chunks of leaves missing, that's an indication that you have slugs or snails. And you can either go out at night and look for them, try to find them in their hiding places, like they hide under rocks and under leaves, and sometimes in the mulch if you've got too much mulch. So you might want to decrease the thickness of the mulch. And, you know, normally I would apply 2 to 4 inches of mulch in a regular garden, but with succulents, it's more like 1 inch. And you can trap them with cardboard boxes upside down. They usually hide underneath the cardboard box. You can find them in the morning that way. Some people use pie tins of beer, and that supposedly attracts them. I have yet to make that work for me. Maybe I'm using cheap beer, I don't know. It's not working that well for me. Also, barriers like copper foil, they usually won't cross copper foil, so you can do that around an edge of a planter box, for instance. Natural enemies, some insects will help. Oh, ducks and geese are great at getting snails and slugs. So are chickens, but chickens will also eat your plants. So keep the chickens away from the succulents, or you're going to see a lot of damage. Also, I do use Sluggo or iron phosphate as a bait, as a slug and snail bait, and it is approved for organic gardening purposes. So I do tend to use Sluggo if I see some evidence of snails or slugs and I can't find them. Always refer to the IPM pest notes that the University of California has on their website. So just Google IPM UCANR and you'll come up with all the integrated pest management pest notes for any pest you can imagine. Next up is aphids. Now, I don't really have a big problem with aphids in my garden, and I think it's because you know, when you improve the health of a plant, that increases the immunity to the plant, and they tend to repel more diseases and pests as well. So I rarely see aphids. Maybe at the end of a flowering cycle or something, the aphids might attack an ephorant. I can't pronounce it, but you know, the flower that comes up out of an echeveria. So that's about the only time I have problems with aphids. But you know, ladybugs are good for aphids. Washing it off with water will help with aphids. Compost tea might help. It's anecdotal. There's no firm research, but that might help as well. And I just, you know, if I have a problem with a potted plant that has aphids, I usually just stick it in the ground, and within a few weeks, the aphids are gone if it's in healthy soil. And here's another reference to the pest note as well. Next up. Now, for the past couple of years, this little varmint, little leaf-rolling larva that you see pictured here, little tiny half-inch green caterpillar, it's been wreaking havoc on a lot of my succulents for the past couple of years. This year, it's not so bad, and I don't know if it's the weather conditions changed or I have more birds perhaps eating the moths, because those little critters come from this cabbage moth in my area anyway. There are other moths that will create these little larvae, but this is the one I see in my area. And they just love the apical tips of these plants, and which destroys the plant. It's not nice at all. So I'm always looking for webbiness. I'm going out there looking for webbiness and destroyed leaves, and I usually can try to minimize the damage if I catch it in time. But also I do spray it with a microbial insecticide. It's called Bacillus thuringiensis. I can't pronounce it, but it's the brand name is Thuricide. And that, if you spray that on the leaves and don't wash it off, then that usually will get rid of the critter pretty soon. And it's also safe for insects, birds, and humans, just as Sluggo is safe for animals and humans. Here's another view of the damage that these little larvae can do. So when I see a web like this and some eaten leaves, I suspect that it's a little green little larva like that, with a lot of shriveled leaves around it. So that's what you want to look for. And so, in conclusion, I'd like to thank Bhaska for hosting and supporting this presentation. And I hope I've given you the tools and knowledge you needed to successfully succeed with growing succulents in your own garden. If not, you know, always feel free to reach out to the Master Gardeners. We're here to help. We have office hours, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, as I'll show you in the last slide. And you can reach us by phone on those days during our office hours, or by email, and we'll eventually get back to you during our office hours. Of course, there's no on-site visits right now because of COVID-19, but feel free to reach out by email or phone call, and we answer questions every day. So I heard a little ding ding dong, but I am, that means that they want me to sum it up, and let's see. Oh yeah, and the video. I will be showing that video next in the next slide, so you can find it on YouTube. And sorry for those technical difficulties. This class was originally going to be a hands-on to show you how to do your own succulent propagation. But I hope I've shared enough knowledge with you today that you feel like it was a worthwhile endeavor and part of your day.
Okay, Janice, we actually have a few questions if you're ready to take them.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we have one participant that was wondering if there's a resource for Natafim.
Natafim?
Yes.
Natafim is spelled Netafim. That is a brand name, but there are other half-inch irrigation tubings with emitters built into them. And so I shouldn't promote just one brand. There are other brands out there with emitters built into them. This just happens to be one we Master Gardeners tend to use a lot of. The emitters are either at 6-inch intervals, 12-inch intervals, or 18-inch intervals. And like for vegetable gardens, you want to use the 6-inch and, you know, get more coverage that way. With succulents, usually it's like 12-inch spacing. And you want to place it on both sides of the plant, not just one side of the plant. Don't loop it around the plant because that's not an efficient use of the irrigation lines. Okay.
Okay, and then another question regarding manure. How long does manure need to age before it is suitable for use? So maybe how long it has to be composted or?
Well, it has to be it has to be heated through thoroughly. Like I think the temperature that we look for is like over 140 degrees for so many days. And once the heat in the middle of it subsides, then it's considered well composted and free of disease. I'm not an expert on compost. We do have master gardeners who are also master composters. And so if you want more information on that, I would just reach out to master gardeners or a master composter. I don't want to give you misinformation.
Okay. And a question about what was used on the moth. I think that was it the insecticide. Let me pull
Yeah,
up.
the brand name was Thuricide.
Okay.
Thuricide, I think.
Okay, great. Another question regarding growing succulents. Are there succulents that can grow outdoors in full shade under a tree?
Well, you know, Haworthias and Gasterias and some aloes, they're probably your better bets. But maybe some of the Agave attenuatas that are variegated. Any variegated plant might do a little better there, but you still want to get at least 4 hours of sun, whether it be dappled sun or direct sun.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are succulents easy to grow and low maintenance?
Are they easy to grow and low maintenance?
Yes.
Relatively speaking, I would say yes. They're really easy to propagate, and as you will learn from the YouTube, hopefully you'll watch that. But and in terms of maintenance, I don't think they're any more maintenance than any other garden. If you want them to look nice, you have to go in there a couple of times a year and clean them up and prune them back. And if they get overgrown, or maybe you want to move them around because they're crowding out each other. So that no garden is maintenance free, in my opinion. There's always going to be maintenance if you want it looking nice year round.
Okay, great. And this question was from before the design portion, but in your opinion, which succulents are best for Sunnyvale for all day sun?
Well, agaves, cactus, all day sun. Those are the ones that, if you look back at the recording or the slides, if you hopefully can reference the slides at some point, those are the ones that can, more heat and sun tolerant. Cactus and agaves and aloes, you don't want to put in direct sun, but they can handle the heat. Yeah, aeoniums would be maybe, well, no, actually, I do think that aeoniums can take the heat too. It's just the variegated ones you want to keep out of too much sun. So I think they're, as long as you don't get too cold temperatures, no, I don't think you're going to get any more frost than we get. So I think most of them would probably grow. Of course, I haven't experimented with all of them, but I think those would be the case.
Okay, and one more question. What is the name of the purple ground cover, the spiller that you referred to at the Howard Avenue house?
The Oscularia deltoides is the one that will actually spill over a couple of feet, and it has a pink flower, kind of a pink purple flower. It's also called pink ice plant. I mean, but there's lots of pink ice plants out there, but that was the common name is pink ice plant. But Oscularia deltoides is the botanical name for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, great. Well, I'm showing the YouTube link here on the screen now for those that want to watch my 13-minute propagation video. So sorry we couldn't show it today, but it just didn't stream well. And then, whoops, no, we don't want that. Actually, it sounded good for a second, maybe. The references, please, if you get the slides, then I hope you refer to the references. There's Deborah Lee Baldwin's books there. Succulent Plants of the World is also, oh yeah, so here we go. Here's some other references for succulents and cacti. So I won't spend time reading it. Robin Stockwell from Succulent Gardens, he's written a book too. And there's some online resources as well. And these are our hours: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Mondays is 9 to 4, Wednesdays is 10:30 to 2, Thursdays is 9 to 4. And so feel free to give us a call, and these numbers are located on our Master Gardener website as well. I think that's any additional questions? That's it?
No other questions.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you all. Enjoyed it. You know, this is very stressful not talking to an audience. I hope I didn't come across too cold. All right.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.